To create the leaves, I'm going to be using this texture, this material. It's pretty similar to the reference and it's also free. This leaf material, another really cool leaf material. So here in Blender, once you have it downloaded and in your folder, I'm gonna close this window and I'm gonna press Shift A, Image, Images as Planes, and navigate to the folder where you have your textures. And I'm gonna choose this base color. I'm going to deselect the Use Alpha and Import. Now here we have our image. I'm going to move it right over here and I'm going to Material Preview to see my texture. Alright, I'm gonna rotate it in the Z axis 90 degrees like that and Control A. Let me enable this shortcut. Okay, Control A and apply rotation. And now we have to create some basic mesh for this leaf in order to have some deformation, and for this I'm going to use the knife tool. So in edit mode I press K. Before this I'm going to go to the top view and press K to activate the knife tool. So let's see, I'm going to make some geometry over here. I'm going to make something like this. Now I want to cut more vertices or more edges, so I press E to start a new one, and I can start over here, something like this, another one over here, press E again and cut just over here, and this. Okay, now I can select this face and these faces, X, delete faces. Now I'm going to create more mesh. So for example, this is something that we could make in order to deform a little bit more this leaf. So now I have this basic mesh. I can select these faces and delete them, but now we need more geometry, because if I move that vertex, you can see the distortion, and yeah, it's not working. This is not a proper deformation of the mesh. And to do that in a proper way, I'm going to add a triangulate modifier. Now if I go to the wireframe mode, you can see we are adding this extra geometry to our leaves. So now I can apply this modifier. Now we can select, for example, these vertices that are in this little branch. Select these vertices, or maybe it's better to select the edges in this case. So I select these edges, and before moving anything I'm going to go here to Options and check the correct face attributes, and this will correct the UV while we are moving some vertices. So now with these edges selected, I can press G and move it in Z axis a little bit, something like this. I'm going to cut a new edge over here, so I press K and cut a new one over here. I'm going to select these edges and move them up a little bit, something like this. Click on Shade Smooth, and now we have a basic shape for these leaves. And now let's work a little bit on this leaf material. So I'm gonna open here a new window and change it to the shader editor. So here we have our leaf material, and the first I'm going to do here is adjust the gamma of this image, because this is imported from a 32-bit file. So I need to set this gamma to 2.2. Notice that we have a more reasonable base color, and I'm going to place here also a hue, saturation and value to have the possibility to tweak the value or saturation. I'm going to import the roughness map, just drag and drop the roughness here, set it to non-color data and plug into the roughness. So here we are. I'm going to tweak a little bit this roughness with a color ramp, and the color ramp, if we press and if you don't have it enabled, you should go here to Preferences, Add-ons and search for Node Wrangler. Most of you may know it already, but with the node Wrangler we have some nice shortcuts in order to work with these nodes. For example, here in Colorama I can press Ctrl Shift and left click and I will be watching directly to this node. I'm going to increase these black values a little bit, something like that, and increase the whites. I want a little bit more of contrast here, so let's back into the principal VSDF with Ctrl Shift click. Okay, something like this for now. I'm going to place here the normal map, so drag and drop here the normal map. This is also non-color data, plug into the normal, but before we need to add a vector normal map. I'm going to adjust it a little bit. There we go. And now we need to add the opacity of these leaves. So again, drag and drop the opacity. This is also non-color data and plug it directly to the alpha value. And we will have this result. In cycles it will render nice, but in Eevee we have to tweak some parameters of this material. So I'm going to change the render engine to Eevee, and here in the shader editor I'm going to press N to access this settings panel here in options and change the blend mode to alpha clip. And now we have the proper transparency of the leaf. Now we need something a little bit more tricky, but it's not that much. We need to add the translucent behavior of the leaf. In order to do that, I'm going to add here a translucent shader. I'm going to import the texture of this translucent shader, and you will find it in the folder. So import that into here, and this goes to the color of the translucency. If we take a look at this node with Ctrl Shift and left click, this is the texture, but we need this texture only in this back face of these leaves. So we have to mask this translucent shader to only show it in the back face of this plane. This is actually a plane, and if we go to the viewport overlays and enable face orientation, blue is the front face of the plane and red is the back face of the plane. I'm going to disable this face orientation, and now I'm going to add a shader, mix shader. I can do that, or I can simply shift control and right click to one of the shaders and drag it to another shader, and we will perform a mix shader. Now I can go here, and in this opacity texture, if I press Shift and right click and cut this line, I have another node here. So what I'm gonna do is grab this node and connect it to the factor of this mix shader, but notice that we are still mixing in the front face the translucent shader. So we need to separate the front face from the back face and add it to this mask. In order to do that, I'm going to add here a new input node and geometry, and here we have back facing. With the node Wrangler, if I press Ctrl Shift and left click and I continue clicking, I'm going to preview these nodes, and if I go to back facing, we can see this is black and the back face is white. So this is a mask, and we need to multiply this mask with the opacity, with this one. So I'm going to add here a color, mix RGB color, and I'm going to connect this back facing and this opacity mask. I'm going to make a new node here and move it, and move this over here. Okay, now disconnect this previous mask and connect the new one. Now if I preview this node, notice that we are now mixing, but if I multiply and I set the factor to 1, I'm going to be separating the front face from the back face and keeping this mask. So now if I preview my shader, we have this result. Now we can place here again another color hue, saturation and value, because maybe we want to tweak this value. And if we go to the rendered view, for example in Eevee or cycles, now I'm in Eevee, I'm going to go to the world and decrease this strength and go here and add a quick point lamp, move it up and scale it a little bit. And if I look from below, I can see here it's working properly, this scattering through the leaves. And the same with cycles. If I change to cycles, we can see here this nice scattering. And the material it's pretty much it. Another important thing, really important, is to have the origin in a properly position. And in this case, it's in this vertex, in this point of the leaf. So with this vertex selected, I'm going to press Shift S and cursor to selected. And now in object mode, right click and set origin to 3D cursor. Now that we have the 3D cursor here, I'm going to select these two vertices and press O to have the proportional editing enabled, as you can see over here. And I press period to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. And now if I rotate this, and with the wheel mouse I'm going to decrease a little bit the radius of this proportional editing and just move this down a little bit to have this effect of gravity, just a little bit. And something like this, it could work nice. Notice that when we have the light from below, we are not seeing this translucency effect. And if we look down, the light is not bouncing into the leaves. So in order to avoid that, what I can do is disconnect this mask that we have made and leave this factor, set this to 0.5. And now as you can see, if we move this light up, it's going to have the properly behavior. But now we have the issue with the alpha mask. So now what we can do is add here a shader, transparent shader, mix these two shaders and connect the opacity texture into this factor. Now this is the inverse of what we want. So I'm going to place here a color invert and now we have a better behavior of the light. As you can see, we are passing through and we have the same behavior on both sides. And with this slider, we can change how much the light goes through the leaves. So this is another kind of approach for this leaf material.